Adam Miller began his lifelong pursuit of collecting old songs while still in grade school. Armed with an audiographic memory and an uncommonly good ear for melody, his childhood ambition was to learn every song he heard. An accomplished folklorist, historian, and song collector, he has now amassed a remarkable repertoire of over 5,000 songs. One of the premier autoharpists in the world, Adam Miller is a renowned American folk singer and natural-born storyteller. He will also be performing at South Regional Library on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. And with no further ado and great thanks from the library, please help me welcome Mr. Adam Miller.
Well, friends, I'm happy to see so many of you here. I'm going to tell you a story about a man from Oklahoma by the name of Woody Guthrie. In a dozen years, he wrote over 1,000 songs, and he didn't use an original melody for any one of them. He took songs that he loved, and he recycled the melodies, and he made up his own words, and he did it over 1,000 times. And the real testament to Woody's achievement is that we still sing Woody's words to those old tunes today. He was born July 14th of 1912, 12 days after his namesake, Woodrow Wilson, was nominated for the Democratic ticket for the presidency. Everybody called him Woody. From his daddy, Charlie, he inherited a sense of optimism, and from his mother, Nora, he inherited her love of the old English language ballads and some of her madness. Charlie Guthrie brought his family from Texas to Okemah right after statehood. You see, the U.S. government kicked all the Indians out of the Indian Territory and made it the state of Oklahoma. It was well on its way to becoming the largest oil-producing region in the United States. And Charlie Guthrie was the first county clerk at the county seat of Okemah. Woody described his father as a hard-hitting, fist-fighting Democrat, and he liked to tell people that his daddy was the man who miscounted the votes at election time. Well, Charlie Guthrie, he invested well in real estate during the big oil boom, and soon he was pretty well off. By the time Woody was born, his father was one of the wealthiest guys in town. And he built a big 6-room house. It cost $800 100 years ago, a lot of money. And folks said it was one of the nicest houses in Okemah. But as the years went by, the oil boom played out, and Charlie Guthrie lost most of his money, and soon the family was moving from one rental home to another. And Woody's childhood would have been fairly uneventful if not for the fires. The October 6, 1916 edition of the Okemah Ledger, when Woody was 4, reported that Charlie Guthrie's house had been set on fire by an oil stove. And then 3 years later, on a Tuesday morning, Woody's mother Nora kept his older teenage sister Clara home from school to help with the ironing. She had a big test at school that day, and she wasn't very happy about being asked to stay home. She didn't really want to help, and she and her mother argued, and they had a fight, and somehow Clara spilled kerosene on her dress, and it caught fire, and she was burned from her neck to her knees. And as she lay dying, she asked her little brother Woody, she asked him not to cry. She always called him Woodblock, and he did his best to accommodate that request, running around the house in tears until he fell into his father's arms, sobbing. And then just before his 15th birthday, in the summer of 1927, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Charlie Guthrie was laying down to take a nap, and his wife Nora threw a lit kerosene lantern at him. Burned him from his neck to his navel so very badly, and while he was in the hospital, his lodge brothers quietly arranged to have his wife Nora committed to the insane asylum in Norman, Oklahoma, where she died 2 years later. 20 years later, when Woody was married to Marjorie, they were living in Coney Island. They had a 4-year-old daughter by the name of Kathy Ann. And one day when Woody was out, Marjorie, who was 4 months pregnant with Arlo, went down to the corner store to get a quart of milk. You know, she was only gone for 5 minutes, but in that 5 minutes that she was gone, the electrical cord of a recently repaired radio shorted, and it had set the curtains on fire by the child's bed, and Kathy Ann was horribly burned. Woody got home late that night, and there was a note pinned to the door that said, "Come to the Coney Island Hospital at once." Kathy Ann died the next morning, and there was no funeral. A couple days later, Woody and two of his merchant marine buddies, Cisco Houston and Jimmy Longy, walked with Woody along a moonlit beach in Coney Island, and Woody threw himself to the sand with his arms and legs flailing at the sky. He screamed for 30 seconds, and then it was over, and he didn't mention it again. Friends say that Woody was never the same after Kathy Ann died. You know, she was the inspiration for those magical and enduring children's songs he wrote during her brief childhood. They're still in print. Smithsonian Folkways Records CDs has them today. They're called Songs to Grow On and Nursery Days. And then 6 years later, in 1953, Woody decided to travel out to Baloosahatchee, Florida to visit Stetson Kennedy. Do you remember Stetson Kennedy? Stetson Kennedy is the man from Florida who infiltrated and unmasked the KKK. Read his book, Unmasking the Klan. Well, anyway, Woody went out to visit him during the summer, and they were camping outside in that summer Florida weather, and one morning, Woody decided to rekindle the campfire by sprinkling a little bit of kerosene on the flames. And that fire jumped up and burned his arm so bad, he was never able to play the guitar again. As Woody's buddy Pete Seeger liked to say, the fire gods were after Woody. I ain't got no home, I'm just a rambling round. I'm just a wandering worker and I go from town to town. The police make it hard, boys, wherever I may roam. And I ain't got no home in this world anymore. I was farming on the shares and always I was poor. My crops I raised unto the banker's store. My wife took down and died upon the cabin floor. And I ain't got no home in this world anymore. My brothers and my sisters, they are stranded on this road, a hot and dusty road that 1,000,000 feet have trod. The landlord took my home and drove me from my door. And I ain't got no home in this world anymore. Now as I wander around, it's mighty plain to see this whole world is a great and a funny place to be. The gambling man is rich and the working man is poor. I ain't got no home in this world anymore. A lot of Woody Guthrie's songs have moved into the oral tradition, which means that they're folk songs. And this afternoon, you're the folks. So let's sing one of them together. Well, I've sung this song and I'll sing it again, about the people I've met, the places I've been, some of the problems that troubled my mind, and a lot of good people that I left behind. Singing, so long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. What a long time since I've been home, and I've got to be drifting along. Now the sweethearts, they sat in the dark and they sparked. They hugged and they kissed in that dusty old dark. They sighed and they cried, they hugged and they kissed. But instead of marriage, they talk like this, honey. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. What a long time since I've been home, and I've got to be drifting I went to your family, I asked them for you. They all said, take her, oh take her, please do. She can't cook or sew, she won't clean your floors. So I put on my hat, tiptoed out the door, singing, so long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. What a long time since I've been home, and I've got to be drifting along. Now the preacher Now the telephone rang, it jumped off the wall. That was the preacher making his call. He said, kind friends, this may be the end. You've got your last chance at salvation of sin. Well, the church, it was crowded. The church, it was packed. The pews were so crowded from the front to the back that the preacher could not read a word of his text. So he took off his specs, took up the collection, sang, so long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. What a long time since I've been home, and I've got to be drifting along. Woody Guthrie. To become a folk hero, there are two things required. Half of the people have to be for you, and half of the people have to be against you. If this does not occur, it is unlikely you will ever be a folk hero. Consider your traditional folk heroes: Jesus Christ, Abraham Lincoln, former presidents of the United States. If half the people are with you and half the people are against you, you may be well on your way to becoming a folk hero. I think Robin Hood is probably the most classic who would fit that description, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And that's pretty close to the way things were, when the Depression came on there in the early 1930s, especially down in a place like Oklahoma. It was hard times, and a lot of farmers, things collapsed. Couldn't keep the farm going, couldn't borrow money from the bank. And of course, the worst environmental disaster was soon to come, the great Dust Bowl storms. So there were a lot of outlaws in those days, and one of them was Pretty Boy Floyd, not unlike Robin Hood. Pretty Boy Floyd was a farmer, and one of the newspapers reported that he had robbed a bank, and he got so hard up that he decided he might actually try that, and found that bank robbing was considerably more profitable than farming in the early 1930s. He died in 1934 at the age of 30. They finally shot him down, but I'll tell you what, he was a real folk hero down in Oklahoma because they thought that the banks were the bad guys, because they'd foreclose on their farms and take them away. So if there was somebody who was robbing banks, just like Robin Hood, they cheered Pretty Boy Floyd, and the farmers all gave him a place to stay and kept his secret. Cops would come around and say, have you seen this fella? Oh, no, we've never seen him. He hasn't been down here. So he inspired Woody to... Now, Woody and Pretty Boy Floyd, they probably lived, 40 miles away, from one another growing up down there in Okemah. So Woody took an older melody for an older bandit, the Ballad of Floyd Collins, and he recycled the melodies. He always did, because none of the Woody Guthrie melodies are original. He recycled a lot of those tunes from his favorite band, the Carter Family. He loved the Carter Family. That's where he got most of his tunes. So he made this song about Pretty Boy Floyd. If you gather round me, children, a story I will tell about Pretty Boy Floyd, the outlaw. Oklahoma knew him well. It was in the town of Shawnee on a Saturday afternoon. His wife beside him in the wagon as into town they rode. Well, a deputy sheriff approached him in a manner rather rude, using vulgar words of language that Mrs. Floyd overheard. Well, Pretty Boy grabbed a long chain, and a deputy grabbed his gun, and in the fight that followed, he laid that deputy down. Then he took to the trees and timber found a welcome at every farmer's door. Some would tell about a stranger who would come to beg a meal, and underneath his napkin left $1,000 bill. You know, it was many a starving farmer, the same old story told, how the outlaw paid the mortgage and saved their little home. It was in Oklahoma City, it was on a Christmas day. There came a whole carload of groceries, come with a note to say, well, you say that I'm an outlaw, you say that I'm a thief. Well, here's a Christmas dinner for the families on relief. Well, as through this world you travel, you'll see lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun, and some with a fountain pen. But as through this world you travel, and as through this world you roam, you won't ever see an outlaw drive a family from their home. So I was fortunate to grow up with my mother's 10-inch Folkways recording of the songs to grow on, those wonderful children's songs that Woody wrote, gosh, is it 70 years ago? And they're still on CD, and there isn't a kid who can resist them if you find them in the library or on the internet. And I thought we might explore one of those songs. Woody's wife, his second wife, Marjorie, was a Martha Graham dancer, which is a pretty good job in New York City. And Woody was a folk singer, which means that she went out and earned the money, and he stayed home and took care of the kids. Played a few union gigs now and then. Well, you spend a lot of time with a 3-year-old, there's one thing you're going to discover. 3-year-olds like to ask questions, and every one of them begins with the word why. This is how little kids find out about the world. They say, why this and why the other thing? And if you only learn one salient point at this concert today, when children ask grown-ups questions and grown-ups have a tummy full of food and they're in a good mood and they've had a good night's sleep, they'll give you the most intelligent answers you could ever want to have. But when children ask grown-ups questions when they are cranky or hungry or tired, grown-ups are likely to respond like this. They say, because. And Woody thought it was hilarious that children would very sincerely have these really good questions, and parents would just completely minimize the situation by saying, well, because. And so he did what he always did with things he thought was funny. He recycled a tune that he grew up with. In this case, it was the old hobo song about the Danville gal. And he made a fine children's song that I've sung with 1.5 million kids at different school assemblies all over the country. And we'll see if you'll sing it with me, too. A song about the great questions that kids ask and the not-so-great answers that grown-ups sometimes offer. Why can't a dish break a hammer? Tell me why, oh why? Well, for one thing, a hammer's got a mighty hard head. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And he made a chorus that went like this. Went, why, oh why, oh why, oh why? Tell me why, oh why? Just because, 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 because. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Would you sing it with me? Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why? Tell me why, oh why? Just because, 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 because. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Why can't a bird eat an elephant? Tell me why, oh why? Well, for one thing, an elephant's got a mighty tough skin. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why? Tell me why, oh why? Just because, 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 because. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Why Why won't you answer my questions? Tell me why, oh why? Well, the truth is I don't know the answers. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Let's do it one more time, okay? Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why? Tell me why, oh why? Just because, 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 because. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Woody Guthrie. Well, from his mother, and at that time in history when he lived, before radio, when these songs were still shared in the oral tradition, you know, we had to make our own music. The time you spend today in front of the TV, on the cell phone, in front of the computer, that's about how much time you would have spent making your own music 100 years ago in the days before recorded music. And Woody grew up in a very musical time in Oklahoma. So from his mother and from the people in his neighborhood, he learned a lot of those old English language ballads that were old songs in England before they came over to North America with the people who came. I'm just going to play the first verse of one of those so we can trace what Woody did with this tune. This is a very old song from England, and the story takes place in 100 different folk songs. Careless Love, There is a Tavern in the Town, Grieve, oh Grieve. It's all the same story. It's that you used to want me on your knee and now you want her. So it goes like this. It's called The Butcher's Boy. In Jersey City, where I did dwell, a butcher's boy I loved so well. He courted me both night and day, but now with me he will not stay. So Woody spent a lot of time with the 3-year-old, making food, taking baths, and here's what he did with the tune of The Butcher's Boy. Mama, oh mama, come wash my face, come wash my face, come wash my face. Mama, oh mama, come wash my face. Make it nice and clean, oh. That was probably my favorite song when I was 3. I was over in Decatur, Georgia, visiting my friend Frank Hamilton, who used to play music with Woody Guthrie up at the Seed Shack at Will Geer's place in Topanga Canyon. The story, as Frank told it to me, is that he went to Fairfax High, and they were producing a production of the play Finian's Rainbow by Burton Lane and Yip Harburg. You may recall that play because the main character's name is Woody, based on Woody Guthrie, because Yip Harburg was a very liberal kind of songwriter and championed Woody's cause. And so they were doing this, and there's a harmonica player in the play on Broadway. It was the great Sonny Terry. Frank wanted to learn how to play harmonica like Sonny Terry, so he picked up the phone and he called Woody's wife Marjorie in New York City, long distance. And he said, "Is Woody there? I'd like to get a harmonica lesson." She said, "Frank, Woody went out for a quart of milk about a week ago and we haven't seen him since. This has happened before." She said, "Why don't you call Will Geer up in Topanga Canyon, because Woody may well have crossed the country by now." And that's where he found Woody Guthrie, up at the Seed Shack at Will Geer's place. So he got his harmonica lesson, and Will told him a story. And the story was that many years before, I think back in the late 30s when Woody was working in LA, he'd gotten a gig playing for the Ladies Auxilary in downtown LA. This is a good hour's drive from Topanga Canyon, so he traveled in the pickup truck with Will Geer, and Woody was asleep in the back of the pickup truck with his guitar, no case, and got there, and this is a fancy deal with a linen tablecloth and the ladies in the white gloves and their hair all done nicely, wearing their finest jewelry and this beautiful china and silverware. So they filled their plates, and Woody was just stuffing his mouth with food. And one of these beautifully coiffed ladies came up and she said, "Mr. Guthrie, how come you never sing any songs about the Ladies Auxilary?" So using that same tune, The Butcher's Boy, according to Will Geer, this is what Woody Guthrie sang. Oh, the Ladies Auxilary, it's a good auxiliary, about the best auxiliary that you ever did see. If you need an auxiliary, see the Ladies Auxiliary. day. It's that Ladies Auxilary. And he finished his lunch. This is a man who could make up a song in any situation, for any occasion, very organically recycling a melody, just pulling it out of his memory and finding one that would fit the words. And Woody was so good at matching the words to the tune that we still sing Woody's words today, and the original words kind of get left behind. I'll give you another example of one that Woody used. The classical composer Robert Schumann had 3 beautiful daughters, and he wanted them all to be violin players. So he wrote this tune for them in 1844, and if you've ever had a young musician in your house, you've probably heard them practicing the one that we call the Happy Farmer. Well, in 1907, that tune became a hit. Now, I have to remind you that this song was written 111 years ago, was published, and that was the time before political correctness. So this song is about an Indian brave and the Indian girl who loved her, and this was a huge hit when Woody was growing up in Oklahoma. And I don't know if anybody sings it anymore, but it went like this. It was called Red Wing. There once was an Indian maid, a shy little prairie maid, who sang night and day a love song so gay as on the plain she galloped far away. She loved a warrior bold, this shy little maid of old, so brave and gay. He rode one day to battle far away. Oh, the moon shines tonight on pretty Red Wing, the breeze is sighing, the night bird's crying. Oh, far neath the stars your brave is sleeping, while Red Wing's weeping her heart away. So here's what Woody did with this tune. Now remember, trying to make $1 or $2, he and this young fella, Pete Seeger was the son of Charlie Seeger, the folklore professor at UC Berkeley in California. Charlie Seeger got fired 100 years ago for his left-wing politics because he didn't think the United States had any business being in the First World War, but that's a different story. His son, by his first marriage, Pete Seeger, dropped out of Harvard and got interested in folk music, hung out at the Library of Congress, transcribed a lot of those songs that the Lomax has collected, and he latched himself onto Woody Guthrie. You should have seen them because Woody was a little bit more than 5'6", and Pete was 6'3". So, when these guys shared a microphone, Pete was looking down at it, and Woody always had his head tilted up like this at the microphone. And if you ever see a photograph of Pete Seeger singing, he sang the rest of his career like this, even though he was 6'3", because that's how Woody did it. And he stretched out his vocal cords. It was really hard for him to sing at the end of his life. If you were a singer, relax those muscles. So it was July 1940, and they had a $2 gig playing for the Communist Party in Oklahoma City. Now that may seem strange to you today, but back then the Communist Party was like the Green Party today. My grandparents were card-carrying communists. It was a very popular thing to do before World War II. Then the Red Scare happened and everybody pretended they never had a communist card, but that's another story as well. So they were in the office of the Communist Party in Oklahoma City in June of 1940, about to sing for a bunch of men who were going to go on strike. And Woody got the idea, well, instead of an Indian maid, what if she was a union maid? And we've all been singing this one for union groups ever since. So here's what Woody did with it. There once was a union maid who never was afraid of the goons and the ginks and the company finks and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. She went to the union hall when a meeting it was called, and when those company boys came round, she always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. No, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die. Now those words just fall off your tongue. This is an example of his gift for syntax and melody. You can't scare me, I'm sticking to the union. It's perfect. It just falls right out of your mouth. It doesn't matter what the old words were once you seize onto those. And that's why people have been singing this song for union groups for 75 years. And if I ever do a union group, this is the one I start with. In the interest of full disclosure, my father was a labor lawyer and my grandfathers were union officials. We weren't allowed to have table grapes in my family for 18 years in solidarity with the farm workers. So this is how Woody did it. He took songs he knew, he recycled the melodies, and that was his greatest gift. And he did it very unconsciously. In fact, there's a story that Pete Seeger used to tell that Woody wrote a little song about, rambling round your city, rambling round your town. I never see a friendly face as I go rambling round. So Pete said, well, you're using the tune. You're using that old tune that Gussie L. Davis published in 1886. It's the tune from Goodnight Irene. And Woody was surprised at anyone because it was such an organic process for him. He didn't do it consciously. Somehow he would, in his mind, find the tune and marry the right words to it. So I'll tell you a true story. My mentor was Sam Hinton. He was born in Tulsa on March 31st of 1917. And Sam was my mentor and got me into this work. And now that he's passed on, I'm trying to carry on this tradition. Because when I was a kid, Sam's the guy who did the folk music programs at the libraries and the schools and the folk festivals. Sam was the director of the Scripps Aquarium in San Diego from 1946 to 1964. And when Sam was growing up in Crockett, Texas, he wanted to be a zoologist. So in those days, if you were a kid in Crockett, Texas, you took the zoology program at Texas A&M. And as a teenager, around 1935, 36, maybe even 37, they sent Sam and a bunch of other students out to the Imperial Valley, just east of the Salton Sea, down there where San Diego is. It's about 121 degrees there in the summer. And they were out there, they were supposed to measure the internal temperature of horned toads and report on this. I cannot explain to this audience how this is accomplished, but we are in a public library if you want to know more about how that technique is done. So the story that he told me is that once the sun set, they were done doing that work, and out there in the Imperial Valley, the greatest environmental disaster of the 20th century is the Dust Bowl. See, farmers were growing this very specialized kind of wheat in the days before people understood the nature of rotating crops. They grew the same wheat in the same place for decade after decade after decade until the earth turned into black talcum powder. You can see the photographs in the library, drifts of it like snow, covering the barn with the cows standing on the roof. 500,000 farmers were affected. The entire crop was lost. Some 300,000 of them just walked away from their farms because they were buried in this black dust that went up in the sky and covered Manhattan for a day. So enormous was this environmental disaster. And some 300,000 of these farmers just took off their shoes and walked out to California. And the reason they did so is because there had been advertisements placed in their areas saying that they would get $5 a day to pick crops in California. I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. So all of them had come to California, and they found that there wasn't as much work as they thought. And hundreds of thousands of them were living on little creeks that didn't put out nearly as much water in Southern California as you get out of your bathtub when you turn it on. All of them using that as a toilet, as a place to cook food, as a place to wash, as a place to get drinking water. And, Sam would go through these camps at night, and he was a song collector like me, and he heard in every one of these camps the same song, slightly different versions, this song that seemed to belong to these farm workers about their experience of leaving Oklahoma. Later, he learned that this song had been written by Woody Guthrie 24 short months before, just before he left Okemah and went out to Los Angeles himself. Woody came out in 37. So when Sam got out there in 37, this song was already widespread. Nobody knew Woody Guthrie's name. Nobody knew who wrote the song. But dozens of people were singing the Talking Dust Bowl Blues that Woody had written back in Oklahoma in 1935. And I learned it from Sam. And Sam told me that when he was out there, he ran into John Steinbeck, who was out there collecting his notes for the Grapes of Wrath, which describes that Dust Bowl experience in the first chapter and exposed the inequities of the farm worker system that made John Steinbeck so unpopular in California when that book was published. So, see if I can remember this one. Along about 1927, I had a little farm that I called heaven. The price is up and the rain come down, so I hauled my crops into town and I got the money. Bought clothes and groceries. I fed the kids. I raised a family. the rain quit and the wind got high and a black old dust storm filled the sky, and I swapped my farm for a Ford machine and we filled it full of that gasoline and we started a rockin' and a rollin', heading out of the old Dust Bowl, going west to the good old Peach Bowl. Well, way up high on a mountain road, I had a hot motor and a heavy load. I was going pretty fast and I wasn't even stopping, bouncing up and down like popcorn popping. I had me a sort of a breakdown. You know, it was a kind of a nervous bust down, it was. There was a mechanic feller there. He said what I had was called engine trouble. Way up high on a mountain road, it was way up there in the piney woods. I give that rollin' Ford a shove and I started to coast as fast as I could. I commenced to coastin', picking up speed. There was a hairpin turn there. I didn't make it. Well, man alive, I'm telling you, the fiddles and the guitars really flew, and that Ford took off like a flying squirrel, and it flew halfway around the world, scattering wives and children all over the side of that there mountain. Well, we got out to the West Coast, broke so dadgum hungry I thought I'd croak, and I bummed up a spud or two, and my wife cooked up a tater stew, and we just poured the kids full of it. Mighty thin stew, though. You could have read a magazine right through it. You know, I always did figure if that stew'd been just a little bit thinner, some of these here politicians could have seen through it, too. If your library only has one book of American folk songs, it probably has the name Lomax on the spine. John Avery Lomax came from Texas, and he got the idea to start collecting cowboy songs. He published the first book of cowboy songs in 1910 called Cowboy Songs and Other Frontier Ballads, and if your library has it, it's still one of the best books on the subject. He worked as a banker in, I think it was Dallas, and when the stock market crashed, he was out of work. So he put a tape recorder, primitive tape recorder, you know, this was 1929. He put a primitive tape recorder in the back of a Ford in the trunk, you know, half the size of a coffin, and took his teenage boy Alan with him, and they went around to all the prisons in the South recording what has now become the basis of our Library of Congress collection. And so Alan Lomax went to work there at the Library of Congress, and their recordings, they were very rare when I first heard them. I think it was March 25th of 1940. Woody Guthrie came by the Library of Congress, and he and Alan Lomax passed a bottle of whiskey back and forth and did these interviews. They're now on YouTube now and on CD and probably in the library. They're a lot easier to get. They're interesting to listen to hear Woody's explanations of where these songs came from and talking about his travels. And in the course of that interview, Woody tells a great story, which I will attempt to retell at this time. Woody went out to California in '37, and he did a lot of traveling back and forth. You know, the whole experience of being a folk singer is running away from home. You know, you get up every morning, you get in the car, and you go as far away as you could. And I guess the whole history of America could be described as running away from home. And Woody Guthrie had the bug real bad. He was a traveling man. He couldn't stay in one place. And his wives always reported that he was gone, and then he was across the country. And he wasn't a very reliable husband or father, but he was a great traveling man. And in one of his travels, he tells the following story. They're coming out of Oklahoma, and Woody didn't like to drive. He always hitchhiked. He always wanted to be the passenger. So he's riding in the truck, in a pickup truck, and the driver sees a white-bearded farmer hitchhiking. So they pull over to stop and pick this man up. And the man gets into the cab and brushes the dust off him, and he says, "Hey, I haven't had work in 10 years, but I'm going to California. They're going to pay me $5 a day to pick fruit." Woody Guthrie said, $5 a day? Is it going to cost you any money to get out to the West? He said, the farmer said, "Oh, yeah, I already paid $10 to a contractor. He's going to take me out to California. He's going to get me a job out there." Woody said, "Well, you know, I don't want to be a naysayer, but, you know, I have been to California a few times, and I'll tell you one thing, my friend. If you go to California, and you see a $5 bill, it'll be because you're at the bank looking through the bars and the teller's holding it up so you can take a look at it. He said they print these handbills that tell you they're going to pay $5 a day picking fruit, and they distribute them all over Oklahoma and Texas. But when you get out here, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go out there and you're going to see this whole field of peach trees, this whole orchard, and you're going to hear the owner say, oh, the peach crop is so bad this year, why they're not even worth picking. I'm just going to let them rot. But since you've already traveled 2,000 miles and you don't have a dime in your pocket, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you pick and pack and load on the back of this truck a ton of peaches, I'll give you $1, and you can take it or leave it. He said, if you get to California, you want to see a $5 bill, you just go into the bank and ask the teller to politely hold it up for you. So it's a good story, and there's a lot of truth in it. And it produced a song that Woody made up when he was in Los Angeles around 1938. And as always, he recycled the tune. And this one was a little harder for me to find, but it was actually published in 1908. And the song was called Hang Out the Backdoor Key. And Woody called it Do-Re-Mi. And we're not talking about the notes of the scale, because whether you went to California in 1938 or 2018, you better have you some of that do-re-mi. Now thousands of folks back east, they say, are leaving home most every day, hitting the hot old dusty way to the California line. Across the desert sands they roll, getting out of that old dust bowl. They think they're going to a sugar bowl. Here's what they find, 'cause the police at the port of entry say, you're number 14,000 for today. And if you ain't got the do-re-mi, boys, if you ain't got the do-re-mi, well, you better go back to beautiful Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Georgia, Tennessee. California, it's a garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see. But believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got the do-re-mi. Now, if you want to buy you a home or farm, that can't do nobody harm, or take your vacation by the mountains or the sea, don't swap your old horse for a car. You better stay right where you are. You better take this little tip from me, 'cause I look through the want ads every day, and the headlines on the papers always say, if you ain't got the do-re-mi, boys, if you ain't got the do-re-mi, well, you better go back to beautiful Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Georgia, Tennessee. California, it's a garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see. But believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got the do-re-mi. Yes, believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got the do-re-mi. Well, one of the tunes that Woody got from the Carter family is the one that people in this part of the world call the Wildwood Flower. This song was first published in 1869, credited to a woman by the name of Maud Irving. So if you ever go to the library and see a recording that says the copyright belongs to Ralph Peer and A.P. Carter, this thing was published before these men were born. But the Carter family got into it right at the time the copyright laws were new. So everything they recorded, Ralph Peer made $1 million on. There's a wonderful new biography about Ralph Peer by Barry Mazur in the library if you want to read about how that came to be. So one of the tunes that Woody learned off the Carter family records is the one that goes like this. Woody was the kind of guy, kind of like the way Mort Saul used to do comedy. Woody would look at the newspaper and sit down at a typewriter and make up a song. So he read on November 1st of 1944, he read about the sinking of the Rueben James up in Iceland and all the men who drowned in that freezing water. It was a front page story. He made a little song about it. And I want to mention at this point there are a lot of books about Woody Guthrie, but most of them are full of lies and folklore. This is a nonfiction program. I'm here to suggest that the true story of Woody Guthrie's life is better than the fiction about him, and most of the books in the library reprint that fiction. But I'm going to recommend two books for those of you who want a scholarly and nonfiction accurate story of Woody's life. The first one is a book called Ramblin' Man by an author named Ed Cray, C-R-A-Y. And the other one is a book called Woody, Cisco, and Me by a New York attorney by the name of Jimmy Longi, L-O-N-G-H-I. You see, one of the ways to avoid getting drafted if you had a wife and kids in World War II is you could volunteer for the Merchant Marines. And you work as a busboy or a dishwasher or waiter, serving the meals and cleaning up for all these soldiers who had to eat as they were transported across the submarine killing grounds to the battlefields out there in Europe. So Cisco Houston, who was Woody's singing and traveling pal, and Jimmy Longi, who's one of their buddies in New York, they all got together and kind of convinced each other that they should join the Merchant Marines. They signed up in May of 1943, and when you read Jimmy Longi's book, you can read about how they were torpedoed. It's a pretty exciting story, but being torpedoed didn't prevent them from re-enlisting. They went out again, the end of 1944 on the SS Sea Porpoise, and I'll tell you a true story from that. You see, if you're in the Merchant Marine, you get to stay way up high on the deck. But the 3,000 soldiers on that ship are down in 5 different holds, 600 soldiers in each hold, way down low in this metal ship. And when they pick up the submarines on the sonar, they start dropping depth charges to blow up the submarines. Well, they explode right next to the ship. And if you're a teenage soldier inside the hold, it is scary as can be because it sounds like you're being torpedoed. So Woody started to hear those depth charges going off. He's way up high on the deck in this tiny, tiny little cabin that he and Jimmy and Cisco shared. And Woody Guthrie very nonchalantly said, "Oh, it's the depth charges again. I'll bet the boys downstairs are scared to death. I think I'm going to go down and sing for them." And Jimmy Longi said, "Are you crazy? If we get hit and you're down there, you're never going to survive. Stay up here on deck where you're close to the 6 lifeboats on a ship with over 3,000 men." Woody said, "Well, suit yourself. I'm going down below." And he put his harmonica in his pocket. He picked up his mandolin and his guitar, and he left him. And Cisco looked at Jimmy, and Jimmy looked at Cisco, and they both felt so guilty. They picked up their guitars, and they followed Woody Guthrie down, 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 all the way down to the number 3 hold, where 600 soldiers, teenagers, and young men in their 20s were stacked 5 high in the bunks, confined by the commander of the ship while the depth charges were going up. They couldn't leave the hold. They were scared to death. So Woody went in there, and he took that song that he'd written to the tune of the Wildwood Flower, and this is what he began singing for the men. Have you heard of a ship called the Good Rueben James? And those hard-fighting men, both of honor and of fame. She flew the stars and stripes in the land of the free, but tonight she's in her grave at the bottom of the sea. Tell me, what were their names? Tell me, what were their names? Did you have a friend on the Good Rueben James? What were their names? Tell me, what were their names? Did you have a friend on the Good Rueben James? Well, 100 men went down to their dark, watery grave. When that good ship went down, only 44 were saved. It was the last day of October when they saved 44 from the cold, icy waters by the cold Iceland shore. Let's sing it together. You ready? Tell me, what were their names? Tell me, what were their names? Did you have a friend on the Good Rueben James? What were their names? Tell me, what were their names? Did you have a friend on the Good Rueben James? It was there in the dark of that uncertain night that they watched for the U-boats and waited for the fight. Then the whine and the rock and the great explosion roared. And they laid the Rueben James on the cold ocean floor. Here we go. Tell me what were their names, tell me what were their names. Did you have a friend on the good Rueben James? What were their names, tell me what were their names. Did you have a friend on the good Rueben James? Well, many years have passed since those brave men are gone, and those cold icy waters now are still and are calm. Many years have passed, but still I wonder why the worst of men must fight and the best of men must die. Tell me what were their names, tell me what were their names. Did you have a friend on the good Rueben James? What were their names, tell me what were their names. Did you have a friend on the good Rueben James? Well, all the men were singing. He had 600 of them singing along, and the depth charges got quieter and quieter. And after about an hour, he was satisfied. He nodded to Jimmy, and he nodded to Cisco, and they picked up their instruments, and they left the hold, and they were going to go back up top and go to their cabin. But as they were going through the ship, they heard singing coming from a hallway. So they took a detour, and they found that there was a toilet, and inside the toilet, there were 50 black soldiers, all singing together in four-part harmony. I remind you that the army was segregated in those days, in peacetime and in wartime. Well, Woody Guthrie, he came from a fairly integrated part of Oklahoma. He described that a lot of his neighbors were black, and a lot of his neighbors were Indians, and a lot of his neighbors spoke Spanish. And Woody just cared how good the music was, and he poked his head inside, and he shouted into the bathroom. He said, "That's some of the best singing I've ever heard. Can we come in there and join you?" One of the African-American sergeants was made very uncomfortable. He said, "You guys can't come in here. This is a colored toilet." Woody said, "We don't care. It's great acoustics. We want to come in and join you." So they all shook their heads, and Woody came in there, and he kicked off John Henry, and soon they were all singing John Henry in four-part harmony. Their voices were resounding, bouncing off the tile walls. And a white corporal came down the hall, and he heard white men singing with black men, and that was an absolute no-no. So he went and he reported it to the captain, and the captain went to the colonel, and he pulled the files, and he said, "You go down there, and you have those men go back into the number 3 hold and sing for the white soldiers, because they're dropping the depth charges again." So the colonel went to the captain went to the corporal went back to the bathroom, and Woody said, "Doesn't matter to me, if you want us to go sing in there in the number 3 hold, it's no problem, but we want to bring these 50 black soldiers with us because it's such a good choir and we sound so good together." The corporal was furious. He went to the captain. He was going to have these guys thrown in the brig. So they went to the colonel. He pulled everybody's file. And you know what they found out? They found out that Woody and Cisco and Jimmy were in the Merchant Marine. They were not subject to military orders or law. Now the depth charges were getting closer and louder and louder and louder. The corporal went back to the captain went back to the colonel, and the colonel said, "Oh, gosh, just get them in there singing. I don't care, have them bring the black soldiers." So the corporal went down, and with a smile on his face, Woody picked up the instruments and led these 50 black soldiers into the number 3 hold, where they all sang together till the depth charges went away. Woody with a guitar that had the words emblazoned around the sound hole, "This machine kills fascists." Here's a song he read the newspaper one day, and he got this story, and he made up a song. The story was in California, near a place called Coalinga on Highway 98. There'd been a plane crash. See, this was during the Bracero program, and Woody didn't even know about its existence. The Bracero program was developed in the Second World War, that if there weren't enough people to pick the crops, because all the farm boys were off fighting the war, there was a real labor shortage, especially in the agricultural parts of America. So the American government made a deal with the Mexican government that Mexican farm workers could come into the United States and pick the crops, and then at the end of the season, if they were broke and they couldn't go home, the American government was obligated to fly them home. So a plane had been chartered out of, I believe it was Oakland Airport. And there's a lot of, if you're a pilot or you read about pilots, there are a lot of big red flags in this story. The first red flag is that there were 28 Mexicans who were supposed to be transported back to Mexico and a crew of 4 people, but they took the wrong aircraft. They took the wrong aircraft, so there weren't enough seats. So 4 of these farm workers were sitting on their luggage. And nobody knows what else went wrong, but this plane, now, I did this show in Coalinga, California, and there was an old woman sitting in the front row, and after the show she came up and she said, you know, I'm Dolores Crabtree. I watched that plane come down. I'll tell you what happened, because I live right next to where it crashed. She says, this story is about 3 years old, she said if you went out there today, you'll still find parts of the plane crash. Apparently there were 300 men confined in a prison camp there, and when that plane came down, they thought it was going to kill them. It crashed nearby. People were falling, still seatbelted into their seats, falling out of the aircraft. It was horrible carnage. And what Woody read in the paper is they knew the name of the pilot and his wife, who was the stewardess. They knew the name of the co-pilot and the name of the engineer, but they didn't know the names of the 28 farm workers. And that inspired Woody to write this song. When he wrote it, it was just a chant. The tune was made up 10 years later in 1958 by a school teacher named Martin Hoffman. This is the only one of the 1,000 Woody Guthrie songs that someone else provided a tune for, and it's called Deportee. The crops are all in and the peaches are rotting. The oranges are stacked in their creosote dumps. They're flying them back to that Mexican border to pay all their wages to wade back again. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita. Adios mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. My father's own father, he waded that river. They took all the money he made in his life. My brothers and sisters come work in the fruit trees. They rode on those trucks till they took down and died. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita. Adios mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. Now some are illegal and some are not wanted. Our work contract's up and we've got to move on. 600 miles to that Mexican border. They chase us like outlaws, like rustlers, like thieves. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita. Adios mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. We died in your hills and we died in your deserts. We died in your valleys, we died in your plains. We died in your fields and we died in your orchards. Both sides of the river we died just the same. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita. Adios mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. The sky plane caught fire over Los Gatos Canyon like a fireball of lightning and shook all our hills. Who are all these friends all scattered like dry leaves? The radio says they are just deportees. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita. Adios mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. Is this the best way we can grow our good orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? To fall like dry leaves and rot on my topsoil, and and be known by no name except deportees. Goodbye to my Juan, goodbye Rosalita. Adios, mi amigos, Jesus and Maria. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be Well, friends, I played at 2,000 libraries in 48 states, and this is the first time I've ever been to this library or this system, so I'm so delighted to see so many people come out for this program today. I want to mention that before we go, at the table with the blue tablecloth at the back of the room, I have a white mailing list, and if you give me your email address and it is legible, I'll let you know the next time I work in North Carolina. It looks like it's going to be the end of April 2019 that I come back out here. I have brochures and business cards on that table as well. And if you take my brochure and place it firmly in the hand of a school principal, they'll invite me back next April to do a school assembly for the kids and explain to them how a Christmas song like the one James Pierpont wrote in Massachusetts in 1859 turns into Jingle Bells, Batman Smells, which is, of course, the most widespread folk song on any campus anywhere in 50 states. I also have CDs with me today. I have 8, count them, 8 different CDs. The CD, the new one, the new storytelling CD called It Might As Well Be a Myth, has a couple of the stories from this program. And when you buy my CDs, you know, not only do you get an hour of listening pleasure with the people you adore the most, but far more importantly, you get to take home a little piece of me, and I get to take home a little piece of you. I also want to point out that if you're watching somebody sing old American folk songs in the 21st century, I invite you to look around and see that you're not in a coffee house or a club or a theater. You're in the meeting room of your own local public library, and you should get used to it because this is kind of where vaudeville went. These performers like myself who do these one-night shows in different places every day, we work in libraries in this century. The programs are presented here by the librarians. Many of them are free. All you have to do is show up and sit in the chairs. And this is sort of where the cultural arts programs are presented. So support the program, support your libraries, and remember that libraries will get you through times of no money. A whole lot better than money is going to get you through times of no libraries. I'd like to tell you one more story before we go. Woody Guthrie was born in Okemah, Oklahoma, July 14th of 1912, 12 days after his namesake Woodrow Wilson was nominated for the presidency. Now, Woodrow Wilson was an old-school Southern Democrat. Woodrow Wilson believed in segregation. In his own words, he said that segregation was a good thing because it diminished the friction between the races. Woodrow Wilson, his favorite movie was called Birth of a Nation, based on a book called The Klansman. And during his presidency, the KKK had its biggest resurgence since the days of Reconstruction. Now, Washington, D.C. was always a segregated town, except for the federal government agencies. Since Reconstruction, black people and white people had worked shoulder to shoulder in those agencies, and when Woodrow Wilson became president, he segregated the federal government. And when he ran for president again in 1916 for his second term, his campaign said, "Vote for me, you vote for peace, vote for the other guy, you vote for war." Nothing could be further from the truth. Shortly after the inauguration, his second inauguration, Woodrow Wilson got the United States into England's and France's war with Germany, the war that we called the First World War, the war that they called the war to end all wars. Well, tens of thousands of American veterans came home, missing feet and hands and arms and legs and eyes and faces, suffering from depression and PTSD. And these soldiers were a painful reminder, an ever-present reminder to family and friends of the unspeakable costs of foreign wars. And they created in this country a class of people who called themselves isolationists. Do we even use that word anymore? An isolationist is somebody who believes that we're going to wait till the soldiers are landing on the shores of Myrtle Beach before we send our troops to fight them. Very different than the way we do wars in the 21st century. But between the First World War and the Second World War, 6 out of 10 American voters were isolationists, and Woody Guthrie was among them. He went out to Los Angeles in 1937 and convinced the people at a little 10-watt radio station on Western Avenue in LA called KFVD. He convinced them to give him a radio show, and soon he was getting $1 a day to sing his Dust Bowl ballads and talk his anti-war talk. There was another war brewing in Europe, and this time the participants were the same ones they'd been in the First World War. England and France were having a beef with Germany. And Woody liked to go on the air and talk about how he needed to stay out of that war and remind people of the lessons of the isolationists. Then over Labor Day weekend, Hitler's army invaded Poland, and England declared war on Germany for the second time in the century, and World War II was a done deal. Now, here in the United States, you can say whatever you want about a war before it's declared, but once that war starts, you better be careful what side of the fence you're on, and old Woody Guthrie was decidedly on the wrong side of the fence. Woody believed that a folk singer's job was to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comfortable. And in November, the station manager had had enough, and he took Woody outside and he fired him for his left-wing politics. Woody was fond of saying, left wing, chicken wing, it's all the same to me. So now he was in Los Angeles as winter was coming on without a jacket or a suitcase or a guitar, but in his pocket he had a letter from his buddy Will Geer. Now, do you remember Will Geer? When I was a teenager, there was a TV show called The Waltons, and Will Geer played the part of Grandpa Walton. And this was one of the only jobs Will could get in film or television in those days, because Will Geer had been blacklisted during the Red Scare, blacklisted for being an alleged fellow traveler of that dreaded Communist Party like Woody Guthrie. I'm here to tell people that although Woody Guthrie did write a column for the communist newspaper, he never was a card-carrying member because nobody in their right mind would have invited him to join. He was so unpredictable and so impulsive, he would have been a terrible communist. So Will Geer wrote to Woody Guthrie and he said, Woody, if you can't get any work in Los Angeles, come on out to New York City and I'll get you a job singing. And if I can't get you a job singing, I'll make them hire you on the stage crew because I'm the star of the show. You see, in those days, Will Geer was one of the highest paid actors in New York City, playing the part of Jeter Lester in the hit play Tobacco Road. So Woody Guthrie folded up this letter and lit a cigarette and stuck out his thumb on Route 66. And he began traveling east, and every time he'd stop for a cigarette or a cup of coffee or a sandwich, he heard a song on the radio in the jukeboxes that had been written by a man who was born in Mogilev, Russia in 1888. A man who traveled to the United States with his impoverished Jewish family and came through Ellis Island, and they lived in squalor on the Lower East Side of New York. A man who got a job as a singing waiter and then tried his hand at songwriting, and he managed to write a song that sold 1 million copies of sheet music in the first 90 days of publication. When the First World War was declared, this man volunteered as a private. And he got stationed at a place called Yaphank, New York. And in Yaphank, New York, he wrote an all-soldier musical revue called Yip Yip Yaphank. By an all-soldier musical revue, I mean that the female parts in the play were performed by the biggest, buffest soldiers they could get. And for this show, this songwriter wrote a song about the United States, but it was such a patriotic, flag-waving song, he didn't think anybody was going to like it in 1918, when all the popular songs talked about going over there and killing the Hun. So he stuck it in his grape juice file. Now, we have songwriters here today. You know about that grape juice file? When you write a new song, it goes in the grape juice file. And you can check back in 20 or 30 years to see if it turns to crappy vinegar or good wine. Only time will tell. Well, 20 years later, a big singer by the name of Kate Smith went up to the songwriter. She said, Mr. Berlin, you have any songs in that grape juice file that are patriotic? Because I'd like to record one because it looks like we're going to have another war. So she recorded this song. It was such a big hit that as Woody Guthrie traveled east in the winter of 1939, every radio station and jukebox was playing Irving Berlin's song. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. Well, it's a great song, and it must be a folk song because all the folks here seem to know it. And it is still sung today, but I want to make sure everybody in this room understands Woody Guthrie hated this song. He hated this song because he was hitchhiking and he was broke, and Irving Berlin was a millionaire. He owned the Music Box Theater on Broadway. He ate in restaurants. He had his own driver and his own limousine, and when he wrote songs for those Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies you take home on DVD from your public library, he got paid $500,000 a picture in Depression money, and he got to retain the copyrights to those songs, something that very few songwriters in any century could negotiate. But there was another reason that Woody hated this song. Woody had hitchhiked from Oklahoma to California, from New York to Oregon, back and forth during the Depression, when one out of 4 people couldn't get a job. Woody'd been in New York. He'd seen those thousands of people waiting online for a free loaf of bread or a bowl of soup. And Woody wanted to know how a man with millions of dollars could be so insensitive as to write a song called God Bless America when most people in this country were praying that they'd be a little bit more blessed and have something that could feed their kids. So he said, when I get to New York, I'm going to write another song about this nation that says all the things God Bless America doesn't say. Well, Woody Guthrie hitchhiked out of Pittsburgh during a record storm. The winds were 75 miles an hour in that storm. Over 70 people froze in New York. So he ducked himself into a diner, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of coffee, just to warm his hands because it was freezing outside. And as he clutched that cup of coffee, defrosting his fingers, he heard a voice announce on the radio that God Bless America was going to replace the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. This may sound like a crazy idea to you today, but I remind you that God Bless America didn't become the national anthem until 1931 during the Hoover administration. This story took place 8 years later. And the national anthem that we have, the Star-Spangled Banner, is a 2-octave song that practically nobody could sing, so it's a good idea to replace the national anthem. And then Woody said to himself, that does it. When I get to New York, I'm going to stop and write that song. So he tried to hitchhike out of Harrisburg, but the storm was so awful, there were 2 feet of snow, and most of the bridges were frozen, and it was a passing park ranger in a pickup truck who saw Woody Guthrie shivering in the snow and picked him up and put him in the back of the pickup truck and drove him to his own parents' house. And these compassionate people filled Woody up with warm bowls of hot buttered clam chowder. They gave him some coffee, and compassionately they gave him $3 for a bus ticket so he could get to New York City in this storm. So without a jacket, a suitcase, or a guitar, Woody rolled into New York City on February 16th of 1940. He took that letter out of his pocket and began asking people for the directions to the address where Will Geer lived, and he got there after sunset. The Geers were living in this big brownstone at the corner of West 5th and 55th Street there. If you go there today, I'll tell you, the building's been knocked down. It's an Apple store. But it was a palatial mansion when Woody got there. Will Geer told him, Woody, we pay $250 rent. Woody said, for a year? Will said, no, every month. Well, Woody stayed with them for a week. He enjoyed their considerable hospitality and slept on their couch. And he borrowed a guitar from Will Geer's wife, Herta. A pre-World War II Brazilian rosewood Martin guitar that would be worth thousands of dollars if it was here at the library today. And Will took Woody down to the Bowery for a few auditions. Years later, Will Geer remembered that for some inexplicable reason, Woody couldn't keep his hands from shaking. Woody played a few gigs on the Bowery and made enough coins to leave the Geer's house, and he took that guitar with him. Herta Geer said she never saw that guitar again. She probably wouldn't want it back after Woody took it out of the case and walked out in that snowstorm, walked 18 blocks across Manhattan to the corner of 6th and West 43rd Street, and there at a little rooming house that doesn't exist anymore, called Hanover House, on the 2nd floor at a little desk, with a yellow pencil, like the kids use in the classroom, and a piece of that lined notebook paper with 3 holes punched in it. 78 years ago this weekend, February 23rd and 24th of 1940. He wrote a song about the United States. He appropriated the tune from a Carter family tune that he loved, a hymn they recorded in Memphis, Tennessee, back in May of 1930. He made one of the verses a chorus. Remember, he wrote this song in response to Irving Berlin's song, God Bless America. Well, he put it in his own grape juice file, because if you're going to knock off 1,000 songs in 12 years, you better get one in the can every morning. Woody Guthrie wrote obsessively, almost compulsively, on scraps of paper, empty cigarette packages, paper napkins, and washroom towels. Somehow he seemed to understand that he didn't have a whole lot of time left. Well, a decade later, Woody was living in Coney Island with his wife Marjorie and their 3 kids, Arlo, Jody, and Nora. Woody was in a bad way. All of his friends were perfectly aware of it. He was so despondent and belligerent. Marjorie didn't know what to do. One night when he'd been drinking, he got so violent she had to call the police. But she was sure that his problem was more than alcoholism. He was so depressed at times he was almost suicidal. So at his wife's urging, in May of 1952, Woody checked himself into Bellevue Hospital in New York City. And after 30 days, the doctors couldn't figure out anything wrong with him. Alcoholism wasn't his problem. They didn't know what was going on. So on July 22nd of 1952, Woody entered the Brooklyn State Hospital. And after 6 weeks of testing, a young doctor was going through the papers in Woody's file and noticed that Woody's mother had been institutionalized with some unidentified illness, and it finally dawned on him. He said, "Why hasn't anybody said that this patient has Huntington's disease?" And after a lifetime of speculation, Woody finally understood what had put his mother Nora in that insane asylum in Norman, Oklahoma. A hereditary brain disorder called Huntington's disease. And there was no cure. So he stayed in that hospital as a voluntary patient for several years, and finally in 1954 in September, he checked himself out and decided to make one last trip to California to see his old friends. To make a long story short, that trip did not go well. His health was collapsing so quickly, when he made it back to New York, the first thing he did was check himself back into Brooklyn State Hospital. And he was in and out of there for 2 years as a voluntary patient. And in May of 1956, an unshaven and scruffy Woody Guthrie checked him out of that hospital, began wandering. The Morris County, New Jersey police arrested Woody Guthrie for trespassing, the local explanation for what you do with a guy who's wandering aimlessly on a freeway in a dazed condition. Woody explained to the cops that he was sick, that he needed to go to hospital, but police have a lot of experience with drunks, and they put Woody in the jail for the night, and the next morning he was examined by Dr. Comeau, who determined that Woody needed to be institutionalized for the welfare of the patient and the safety of others. And Judge Nelson K. Minsk committed Woody Guthrie to the New Jersey State Hospital at Greystone Park. And when Woody got there, he said to the doctors, "Now listen, what I have is called Huntington's disease. This is exactly what my mama had. This is the way she walked. This is the way she talked. This is exactly how she acted." And of course, the doctors thought they knew better. They classified Woody Guthrie as paranoid-type schizophrenic, and it was 6 months before they changed his diagnosis to Huntington's disease. Well, Harold Leventhal, one of Woody's friends, came to visit, and the doctor looked through Woody's file and chuckled to himself. He said to Harold, "You know, this man is really crazy and delusional. He tells me he wrote over 1,000 songs." Woody spent 4 years, 10 months, and 5 days at the Greystone Hospital in New Jersey. He was patient 65935 in Ward 40, which Woody liked to call Wardy 40. And in April 1961, they checked him out of that hospital. Some crazy doctor had written the word improved on Woody's chart, but it was wishful thinking, because within a year, Woody Guthrie couldn't get around without a wheelchair. And he spent the last 5 years of his life laying in a hospital bed in Brooklyn. His wife Marjorie had divorced him and remarried a man named Al, but she made it very clear to her new husband. She said, "Please understand that I will be your wife, but I'm going to spend my days raising awareness of Huntington's disease and caring for Woody in the hospital." She used to say to him, "Woody, would you like a sip of water through a straw?" And old Woody Guthrie would blink his eyes twice for yes and once for no, because they were the last muscles he could control in his face. And as he lay there, fighting that Huntington's disease with all of his remaining life force, that little song he'd written back in Hanover House, the one about the United States, well, friends, it went around the world. Without ever being on the hit parade or the top 40, somehow it has become one of the most well-known English language folk songs in the whole wide world. That means whatever nation your ancestors came from, whatever language they may have spoken at home, if they knew one song in English that wasn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Old MacDonald Had a Farmer, Happy Birthday to You, pretty sure they knew the one that Woody Guthrie wrote at the corner of 43rd Street and 6th Avenue this weekend 78 years ago in February of 1940, just one long block from that New York Public Library. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley, for this land was made for you and me. Now, friends, I want to tell you, I've sung for 1.5 million students at some 7,000 school assemblies in 48 states. I've sung this song with 1.5 million kids, and I didn't have to teach it to them. They already knew it. Because I've never met an early childhood educator on any campus who doesn't make it their personal responsibility to pass this song on to the kids. And they teach them those 3 benign verses Woody wrote about the landscapes he observed in his travels. But I am here to tell you that when Woody wrote this song 78 years ago this weekend, it was decidedly not a children's folk song. It's not the kind of song that you sing with very small children, and self-respecting kindergarten teachers won't touch it with an 11-foot pole. Now remember, Woody was responding to Irving Berlin's song, God Bless America, and he was going to call this song God Blessed America for Me, till he tried the words, This Land Is Your Land, and found they were far more universal and inclusive. So here's one of the verses he wrote at Hanover House in response to God Bless America. You won't hear the kindergarten teachers singing this one. On a bright sunny morning, by the shadow of the steeple, by the welfare office, I saw my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there wondering if God blessed America for me. He wasn't being sacrilegious. He just wanted to know how a millionaire could be so insensitive as to write a song called God Bless America when nobody could get a job. And he wrote another verse at Hanover House that you won't hear the school teachers singing that gives you a little insight into Woody Guthrie's politics. And that verse goes like this. There was a big high wall there that tried to stop me, and a great big sign there said private property, but on the other side, it didn't say nothing. Well, that side was made for you and me. So where'd Woody get his tune? Well, go into the library and look for the CDs that have the recordings of the Carter family from Hilton's, Virginia. At a session for Ralph Peer in May of 1930, they recorded a Southern hymn that's the source of Woody's tune. I don't know if anybody sings this one anymore. Oh, my darling brother, when the world's on fire, do you want God's bosom to be your pillow? Won't you tide me over in the rock of ages? Oh, rock of ages, cleft for me. We don't sing those words anymore, do we? We sing Woody's words. Nobody living can ever stop me as I go walking down freedom's highway. Nobody living can make me turn back, 'cause this land was made for you and me. Let's sing it again. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for